Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a drama fantasy film, Hereafter. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a young female French journalist named Marie waking up in her hotel in India. Her lover is sleeping soundly beside her. She gets up and gets ready to go out. She leaves the hotel room. Along the way, she passes by the hotel receptionist and orders some breakfast for her lover. Marie walks outside and strolls along a series of carts and stalls. She notices a stall being manned by a mother and her young daughter, and she buys one of the necklaces they are selling. Back in the hotel, her lover is woken up by the thundering sound of a tsunami forming. The massive 100-feet-long wave hits the shore and starts rolling toward the mainland. A few seconds later, the wave inches closer to the market where Marie is. She quickly tells the mother and daughter to run, but the tsunami swiftly engulfs them. The mother is swept away by the rushing waters, and Marie holds on to the daughter, but they eventually get separated too. Marie is powerless as the wave takes her along the flooded street. Other people, cars, and even houses are being washed away too. Marie's cardigan gets wrapped around a metal cart, which starts dragging her down. She hastily untangles herself from it, and her head breaks the surface again. She eventually loses consciousness and drowns. A while later, two men fish her out of the water. They perform CPR on her. Then a strange experience happens. Marie finds herself in a peculiar place filled with light. She can make out the pale, shadowy figures of people standing in front of her. The two men manage to revive Marie, and she loses the vision she was having. Later that day, the lover surveys the immense wreckage the tsunami left behind. He finds Marie standing in the middle of it all, looking lost and in shock. The couple reunite and hug each other. Meanwhile, in the US, a factory worker named George gets a visit from his older brother. Accompanying the brother is a wealthy client. It turns out George was a famous medium who can contact people from beyond the grave. He had money, popularity, and a book was even written about him. But he got tired of the life that revolves around death, so he quit being a medium. His brother persuades him to do a psychic reading on his client. George sits with the client and closes his eyes. He tells him that he's sensing a woman in her 50s who was very close with the client before she died. He also senses that she was very sick. The client shares that he had a wife who died of multiple sclerosis. The wife is now telling George she's sorry that the client had to take care of her for their whole marriage because she was sick. She then makes George tell her husband that he should move on and find another woman. She insists on the word June, which George thinks must be a significant date, but the client replies that it doesn't ring any bells. Afterward, the client confesses to Georgie's brother that his wife had a nurse who took care of her for 15 years. He'd been so in love with her, but he never said a word about it because he was devoted to his wife. In London, two young twin brothers named Jason and Marcus spend their meager savings to get a picture taken of them. They hang the picture in a frame in their house. Their mother returns, and it's apparent that she is a heroin addict who can barely take care of herself, much less her two sons. The next morning, two social workers arrive at the house. They've long been suspecting that the heroin addict has been neglecting the twins. They now aim to catch her in the act and take the boys away from her. But Jason and Marcus do not want to get separated from each other, so they cover up for their mother and pretend that she is capable. Later on, the mother sees the picture of her sons, and she gets inspired to finally kick her addiction. She asks Marcus to buy her detox medicine from the nearby pharmacist, but Jason volunteers instead. Jason takes the prescription and chats on the phone with Marcus as he walks out of the pharmacist. However, on the way home, he encounters a group of older kids who harass him. Jason tries to run away, but he gets hit by a van while crossing the street. Marcus hears the accident on the phone and rushes out of the house. He finds his dead brother's body splayed out on the sidewalk. On the other side, Marie goes back home to France and throws herself into her work, but she isn't completely okay. While in the middle of a broadcast, she gets another vision about the strange place she saw when she drowned. Her lover, who is also the producer of her news program, notices her behavior and advises her to take some time off work. One evening, George attends a cooking class and gets partnered with a woman named Melanie. The two hit it off, and they have chemistry between them. When he gets home after his class, George gets cornered by a woman who's desperate to have a reading. She learned about him because of the client. She begs George to contact her dead child, but he refuses and slams the door in her face. George talks to his brother about it the next morning. The brother says that he will talk to his client, but he doesn't really understand why George doesn't want to do readings anymore if he can make money from it. George answers that it's because of his so-called gift that he can't have any meaningful relationships with people. His psychic ability always lets him know the secrets of any person he's close with, and a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. The day of Jason's funeral comes, and Marcus collects his brother's ashes. The social workers also attend and get Marcus so he can be placed at a foster home. Marcus doesn't want to leave his mother, but she tells him she needs some time alone so she could heal, and she's not strong enough to take care of him now. Marcus begrudgingly says goodbye to her. In France, Marie submits a proposal to write a biography on François Mitterrand. The publisher eagerly greenlights her new project. George and Melanie are partners again in cooking class. They have fun again, and George invites Melanie to cook at his apartment. While they're preparing the meal, a voicemail from his brother starts playing. The brother tells George that he had already talked to the client and told him not to tell people anymore about Georgie's talent. Melanie gets curious about Georgie's talent, and he reluctantly explains that he's been having visions since he was a child. She persuades him to do a reading for her. At first, George says no, because they're in the early stages of their relationship, and doing a reading on Melanie would ruin what they have. But Melanie is persistent, so George sits her down in his living room and starts the reading. George tells Melanie that he's sensing her mother. He can also feel pain in his chest. Melanie shares that her mother died of a heart attack. There is something else that George sensed, but he doesn't want to say it to her. Melanie prods him again, and he tells her that he sensed her father, and he kept apologizing for what he did to her when she was a child. All at once, tears start pouring down her face. It's implied that her father abused her years ago, and she has been repressing it all this time. Melanie now regrets pushing George to do a reading on her. She leaves his apartment after promising that she'll see him next week, but George knows deep down inside that she won't return again because he already knows too much about her. Just like what he said to his brother, his talent ruins the relationships in his life. On the other side, Marcus is taken to his new foster parents. They are a nice couple, but Marcus deeply misses his brother. Meanwhile, Marie visits a hospice director in Switzerland. The director specializes in studying the afterlife, and Marie is interested in knowing if what she saw in her vision was the afterlife. The director gives her all her research, saying that many scientists have been working on it in secret because many religious groups want them silenced. She hopes that Marie's prominence will be able to widen the public's awareness of the afterlife. One morning, George gets summoned to his boss's office. They inform him that he's getting laid off, but he will be getting a nice severance package. George drowns his sorrows in a bar with his brother. The brother once again suggests that he go back to advertising his medium services, but George still refuses. He attends his next cooking class, but as expected, Melanie is no longer there. At the same time, Marcus runs away from his foster home after stealing some money. He goes around the city consulting various seers, physics, and quacks, who offer to contact his twin's spirit from the afterlife. But not one of them is a true psychic, and Marcus just keeps getting even more and more disappointed. He quietly returns to the foster home. He does more research on mediums, and he chances upon Georgie's website. Marcus leaves again and goes to the train station to find George. But just before he is about to board, his cap flies off, and he misses his train. A few seconds after the train pulls away from the station, it explodes because of a bomb inside. Marcus had narrowly missed death by a few seconds. In France, Marie submits the first 3 chapters of her book on the afterlife. Unfortunately, the publisher did not think it would be a good bestseller. The publisher concedes that her book's premise is interesting, but the subject is only for a specialized market. Marie tells him that she saw the afterlife herself when she was momentarily dead during the tsunami, and he has to believe that what she wrote is genuine, but he still firmly rejects her. Marie gets her bag and quietly leaves the office. That night, she gets dinner with her lover. She begs for her job back, but he tells her it's not that easy, because the network is wary of how her book will affect them. Marie also deduces that her lover is now sleeping with another woman, so she leaves him. When she gets home, her phone rings. It's her publisher calling to tell her that he won't be printing her book, but he will recommend other more fitting publishers. Marie happily accepts and sends her manuscript to them. Meanwhile, George has reluctantly accepted his brother's offer to get him back in the medium business. He already rented a large office and has ideas about George holding public readings. George gets overwhelmed by all this, and he gets the sense that his brother will be exploiting him. George decides to go on a trip so he can find himself. He leaves a letter for his brother, and he jets off to London. He chose London because he is a huge fan of the author Charles Dickens. After almost a year, Marcus' mother is still in rehab, and her recovery will be taking longer. His foster parents are still trying their best to connect with him, but he remains closed off and sullen. Marie's book gets published by an American company, and they organize a book reading for her at a book fair in London after it gets published. George arrives in London and goes on a tour of Charles Dickens' home. Inside, he sees a poster of his favorite narrator, holding a book reading at the same fair where Marie will be. Marcus' foster parents decide to take him to the book fair so he can meet their former foster child who is now successful. When they arrive, Marcus asks if he can wander around, and they agree. George attends the book reading of the narrator and gets a CD signed. While walking around the fair, he hears Marie's reading and he gets intrigued. He buys her book and the two share a moment. She signs his copy, and when she hands it back to him, he senses her near-death experience. Afterward, George bumps into Marcus, who recognizes him as the medium he saw on the internet. He pesters George, who tells him to go away, but he follows George out of the fair and into his hotel. George runs to his room, and he sees that Marcus is just waiting for him outside of the hotel. Night comes, and the kid is still there. George pities them, so he invites Marcus inside. He holds Marcus' hand, and he immediately senses that someone close to him has passed away. George remarks that Jason talks a lot, and he has a lot of things he wants to tell Marcus. Jason tells him that he shouldn't worry about him because he's doing fine in the afterlife. He also adds that Marcus had grown up depending on Jason, but now that Jason is gone, Marcus has to look out for himself. It turns out, Jason was the one who knocked the cap off Marcus' head that day at the train station because he knew that there was a bomb on the train. Finally, the twin brother says that he will always be with Marcus because they are one. Marcus finally gets the closure he needs and is now ready to move on with his life. George takes him home. Later that night, Marcus calls George. He informs him that he learned where Marie's hotel is. He knows that George likes Marie, so as a sign of gratitude, he encourages George to find Marie. George drops by her hotel, but Marie isn't there. He leaves her a letter inviting her to a cafe. Sometime later, Marcus' mother recovers and they reunite. She will now be taking much better care of him. Marie goes to the cafe where she and George will meet. George is already there. He stands up to approach her, but he gets a vision of the two of them kissing and holding hands. The future is bright for the two of them because he has finally found someone who knows all of him and is not afraid. The movie ends with the two of them shaking hands and smiling at each other. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.